On the 28th of October, 1272, King Henry III of England lay dying in his bed at Westminster Palace. His eldest son, Edward, a fearsome prince, making his way back from crusade, was about to land in Sicily. True, steps had already been taken to secure Edward's succession, and there was no credible challenger to his inheritance. However, there were also grounds for concern. 2 centuries had passed since the Norman conquest of England, and in that time only one eldest surviving son, Richard the Lionheart, had succeeded peacefully to his father's throne. Henry himself had first been crowned at Gloucester in 1216 because Westminster was, at that time, occupied by a French army. More recently, from 1263 to 1267, England had been torn apart by a civil war in which Henry and Edward, along with Henry's brother, Richard of Cornwall, and his eldest son, Henry of Almaine, had been captured and held prisoner by rebels led by Simon de Montfort. As we shall see, the wounds from this war had yet fully to heal. Any medieval succession was an uneasy process, and it must have been an anxious time for those on the King's Council. But there was to be no peace that day for the fading king. A great crowd of Londoners had chased their aldermanic governors from the London Guildhall and had burst into Westminster Hall. From here their shouts easily reached the royal chamber. "We are the Commune of the city, and to us belongs the election of the city's mayor, and we definitely want Walter Hervey, whom we have elected, to be mayor." In response, the aldermen, of whom there were no more than 24, and their supporters claimed the right of election belonged to them. Their candidate for mayor was Philip the Tailor. They declared that they were the head of the body politic in London, whereas the populace were just the limbs. They also claimed that they sat in judgment in all legal cases heard in the city, and that because many of the mob did not have lands or properties within the city, or even that they were sons of diverse mothers and of servile status, they cared little or nothing for the city's well-being. No doubt preoccupied with the succession, fearful lest the king be further disturbed, and reluctant to take sides in what to them was an internal municipal dispute, the men of the King's Council sent all the Londoners away, warning Walter Hervey and his supporters not to come to Westminster in such large numbers again. The appearance of a multitude of contending Londoners at Westminster must have been particularly unwelcome. The last time a great crowd of angry Londoners had come to Westminster Palace had been in the spring of 1267, when a mob had burst in, broken doors, windows and chairs, and carried off whatever they possibly could. Westminster, the site of his beloved abbey, was Henry's favourite residence, and the Abbot of Westminster was a frequent recipient of royal patronage. This had led to repeated clashes between the king and the citizens of London throughout Henry's reign, as the Londoners saw the king's patronage of the villa outside the medieval city as a threat to their authority and privileges. Trouble had most commonly arisen between Henry and the Londoners, however, in response to royal demands for supply. The most shocking of these incidents had occurred in January 1255, when the king had demanded the Londoners pay him a tallage of 3,000 marks, which was equal to £2,000. Ralph Hardle, the Mayor of London, simply refused to pay, and instead offered the king an aid of 2,000 marks, or just over £1,300. More important to the Londoners than the money was the principle. A tallage was a tax which the king could levy on the Londoners at will, whereas an aid carried with it an implication of taxation by consent. Following a 2-week standoff, the Londoners had backed down in 1255, but grudges were born on both sides, and in 1258 matters came to a head. In February of that year, the king moved against his opponents in the city and removed all the aldermen from their positions. He even had 8 of them, including Ralph Hardle, charged with malfeasance in the collection of the 1255 tallage. 3 months later, however, Henry was forced by his barons to agree to a reform programme that was even more ambitious than Magna Carta in its scope, and it is no surprise that the Londoners, on the whole, supported the reformers. In 1263, civil war broke out, and the Londoners, led by their populist mayor Thomas Fitz, welcomed the baronial army into the city. Indeed, as Henry's queen, Eleanor, attempted to flee the Tower of London for Windsor, she was pelted with stones, filth and eggs by a mob of Londoners atop London Bridge. A year later, the Commune of London was joined by oath with the baronial opposition to Henry, and hundreds of Londoners then fought alongside Simon de Montfort at the Battle of Lewes, in which battle Henry, his brother, son and nephew had been captured. In return for their support of his cause, Montfort rewarded the Londoners by summoning 4 representatives of the city to his famous Parliament of January 1265, the first Parliament to which lords, barons, knights and townsmen were all summoned. However, on the 4th of August 1265, Montfort's army was destroyed at the Battle of Evesham, and the Londoners immediately felt the king's wrath for having allied themselves with the Montfortian cause. Leading rebels were arrested and lost their properties. A great many fled the city, and the citizens were saddled with a huge fine of 20,000 marks, that is, over £13,000. It would be wrong, however, to think that every Londoner has supported Montfort against the king. One who seems not to have done is Walter Hervey, the popular choice for mayor in 1272. Hervey's origins are obscure. We do not know where or when he was born, and he does not appear to have been a merchant who grew rich through dealings with the royal court. In 1253 and 1258, his name appeared on witness lists alongside the names of mayors, sheriffs and aldermen, which indicates that he had a place in aldermanic circles before he held political office. Beyond that, it is hard to find much firm evidence of his career prior to 1265 at all. Nevertheless, what does seem clear is that Hervey had been a member of the Royalist Party within London. For when London's mayor, Thomas Fitz, who could have had no expectations of mercy from a vengeful king, was arrested and removed from his position as alderman of the ward of Cheap in 1265, he was replaced by Hervey, who seems to have controlled the ward for the next 9 years. Hervey was rewarded with a series of royal appointments. At various times the king installed Hervey as bailiff, receiver, escheator, chamberlain and sheriff of London. In addition to these offices of the king's gift, Hervey also obtained the highest municipal office in the land. In October 1271, he was elected, seemingly without any turmoil, by his fellow aldermen as Mayor of London. Hervey also received some modest gifts from his royal master: 2 robes for him and his wife Isabel, the grant of a property in the parish of St. Peter of Woodwolf in return for a payment of 80 marks, £10 from the merchandise of a convicted felon, and a £30 gift for losses sustained during the recent civil war. At an unknown point during these years, Hervey was also granted, this time by the leading royalist baron Roger Mortimer, a property which had been seized in 1265 from one of Hervey's fellow aldermen, Stephen Buckral, who had been one of the most prominent rebels against the king. This grant led to a protracted dispute with Isabella, Stephen's widow, that passed to and fro between London's Court of Husting and the King's Bench for years, until it was finally settled in Isabella's favour. Hervey was, then, a man whom the king trusted absolutely. It is therefore no surprise that between 1267 and 1272, Hervey was one of those repeatedly charged by the king with assessing his fellow citizens for the collection of the fine of 20,000 marks. As royal escheator, Hervey administered land that came into the king's possession through the failure of a line or when the heir was a minor. As royal assessor, he clearly had a great deal of power to pursue his fellow citizens for money. Hervey enthusiastically executed both offices. It was most probably his zealous application in these roles which saw the majority of his fellow aldermen turn against him and seek to elect Philip the Tailor as mayor in 1272. One of the aldermen now opposed to Hervey, and perhaps even one of those chased to Westminster in October 1272, was the 71-year-old alderman of Billingsgate Ward, Arnold fitz Thedmar. Arnold was a wealthy merchant of German descent who held several municipal offices. He was, for example, spokesman for the German merchants in London and keeper of the city's charters. He was also the author and compiler of a book which was the first book of its kind produced in the British Isles. This book is most famous for its Chronicle of the Mayors and Sheriffs of London, which covers the years 1188 to 1274. In a great age of monastic writing, Arnold was the first layman in Britain to compose a historical account of his times. Indeed, it is only thanks to Arnold's 1600-word report of the 1272 election that we know anything of the events of that autumn in London. Arnold recorded Hervey's first election as mayor in 1271 without any hostility, which may suggest that at that point he had yet to cross swords with Hervey. Certainly, Hervey was appointed to another commission to pursue the arrears of the fine in July 1272, and it may well have been Hervey's behaviour in that round of investigations that prompted Arnold to set down a 1700-word account elsewhere in his book, in which Arnold showed that he had paid £100 towards a fine, and that he had therefore been discharged from the obligation to make any further payments, both towards this original fine and to a subsequent one of 1,000 marks made to the king's brother for damage the Londoners had caused to his manor of Isleworth in 1264. Notwithstanding his exemptions, Arnold claimed in this account that two subsequent mayors, Hervey and his successor Henry le Wallis, had both sought to wring more money from him, attempts which had forced Arnold to repair twice to the Chancery to obtain royal letters ordering Arnold's fellow Londoners to stop pursuing him for money. Arnold was far from the only leading Londoner of the period to be given royal exemptions from making further payments towards a fine. However much the wealthier Londoners claimed to have paid, it must have riled the poorer citizens to witness their richer fellows obtaining exemptions in this fashion. It is also clear that these exemptions cut little ice with Hervey. His political manifesto was clear: use the dissatisfaction and anger of the poorer Londoners against their richer masters. According to Arnold, Hervey promised the Common Salt in 1272 that he would protect each of them throughout the entire term of his mayoralty, exempt from all tallages, exactions and tolls, and that he would discharge all the city's debts, owed both to the Queen and to all others, out of the arrears of the richest citizens contained on the rolls of the city's chamberlain. Arnold's claims can be corroborated. In 1276, a major royal inquiry known as the 100 Inquisitions saw juries being sworn in each of London's wards to answer specific questions about taxation, jurisdiction and privileges. In ward after ward, these juries declared the aldermen of London had opposed Hervey because he had sought to protect the poorer citizens from financial oppression, and to clear the royal fine by chasing the richer and more powerful citizens for their arrears. No wonder then that at the mayoral election of 1272, the more discreet citizens, in Arnold's words, lined up against Hervey. The events of the 28th of October were repeated on an almost daily basis for the next 3 weeks. Disregarding the orders of the council not to bring a horde of supporters to Westminster with him, Hervey arrived with an innumerable crowd, both on horse and on foot, on the 29th of October, and indeed each day until the 11th of November. Accused of seeking office only for its own sake, Hervey replied that municipal office was in fact a burden that he was willing to shoulder in order to support the poor citizens against the rich, who wanted to oppress them in tallages and expenditures in the city for the love of God and charitable motives. On the 11th of November, an exasperated royal council suggested setting aside both Hervey and Philip the Tailor in favour of a royal custodian until the citizens could unanimously agree upon a candidate. An attempt was made to find a consensus by electing a panel of 10 men, 5 from the Aldermanic party and 5 from the Popular party. Its efforts were interrupted on the 16th of November when King Henry died. On the next day, the Earl of Gloucester, the Archbishop of York, and many other magnates went to London to proclaim the new king's peace. Upon entering the Guildhall, they found Hervey there with a large crowd of supporters. Shocked by the discord and fearful of the consequences for the peace of the city at a time of succession, the Earl of Gloucester suggested that Hervey should be admitted as mayor. The alderman argued against this and asked that the panel be allowed to complete its work, but the magnates of the realm had seen enough, and on the 18th of November, in front of a huge number of Londoners outside St Paul's Cathedral, the Archbishop of York and the Earl of Gloucester, together with many other magnates and councillors, proclaimed that Hervey should be mayor for 1 year only, lest anything worse happen in the city. Hervey completed his term of office and was succeeded peacefully by Henry le Wallis in October 1273. But Hervey's enemies were in no mood to be reconciled with their foe, and now that Hervey was no longer mayor, they were in a better position to move against him. Arnold had already accused Hervey of turning a blind eye to the misdeeds of London's bakers, who should have been put in the pillory for selling loaves that did not weigh what they ought to have done. Arnold also claimed that Hervey had accepted bribes and suspended London's Court of Husting to avoid answering a legal challenge brought by Isabella Buckerell, Stephen's widow, for the property which Mortimer had given him. In December 1273, the aldermen annulled charters which Hervey had granted in favour of several of London's craft guilds. They also had Hervey attached by writ. In May 1274, a charge sheet against Hervey detailing accusations of bribe-taking, malfeasance, the levying of unfair tallages, sealing false measures, and illegal actions in court was read out in the Court of Husting. Hervey fought back in the manner he knew best. He engaged London's lower orders, and in June 1274 he brought the business at the Husting Court to a halt by bursting in with a huge crowd. Ulterus Hervey venit cum multitudine maxima, recorded the scribe before interrupting his work. On this occasion, however, the King's Council were more willing to support the aldermen of London and their supporters. Hervey was defeated. He was stripped of his aldermanic office and given a life ban from holding office within the city. Was there any basis of truth in the accusations against Hervey? Certainly, in 1276, a few of the 100 juries answered that Hervey had acted unfairly when he obtained the property in the parish of St Peter of Woodwharf in 1267. There were 2 accusations that he had favoured alien merchants. At another judicial inquest of 1276, Hervey also defended himself against charges of sealing 2 false measures. But there is no evidence that Hervey was ever convicted of any of these charges. Certainly he was not immersed by the justices who heard the complaints in 1276. Perhaps he was a man who did indeed fulfil the duties of his office for charitable motives. Whatever the truth of the accusations against him, after 1276 he disappeared not just from public life in London, but also the historical record. He was perhaps still alive in April 1279, when an allowance to Hervey of £32.16 was reconfirmed at the Exchequer. But it is just as likely that this was issued for the benefit of his estate. We do not know when Hervey died, nor do we know whether he was survived by his wife or any children. His will was not enrolled at London's Husting Court, which may suggest that he died outside the city. In the end, his final days were as obscure as his beginnings. Hervey was a populist who convinced the poorer citizens of London that he could protect their interests against their richer masters. For a while he was successful, but in the end his enemies overcame him and undid the majority of his programme. But the events of autumn 1272 do allow us to glimpse some of the tensions which existed in 13th century London. These tensions were certainly exacerbated by the royal mulct of the Londoners after 1265, which set citizen against citizen. But what is also clear is that for all of Arnold's fulminations that the aldermen showed by many reasons that the election of the mayor belonged to them, because they were as though the head and the populace were as though the limbs, this was an articulation of hope rather than an expectation. In fact, there was plainly no settled election procedure for the mayor in London. The charter which King John had granted to the Londoners in May 1215 stated that we will and strictly command that our aforesaid barons of our aforesaid city of London may choose unto themselves a mayor of themselves in manner and form aforesaid. No doubt the aldermen could therefore claim that they, as the barons of London, had the right to choose unto themselves a mayor for themselves. But this was not an incontrovertible claim. Where should this election take place? Who should decide the candidates? Who indeed were the barons of London? In the end, it would take 200 years of further intermittent, acrimonious and disorderly elections before an electoral procedure would be finalised in 1475, which essentially remains the same to this day.